Look at that. We're back at 7:10 exactly. We will call to order at 7:10. If there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof, you can let us know now or when it comes up. Next is the consent reports, and they include the minutes, the agenda, and the minutes, and the Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting from December 4th. So is there any item a councillor would like to remove from the consent agenda to discuss separately? Seeing none, the recommended motion is that the Committee of the Whole recommend Council approve the consent recommendations C1 to C3. Is there a mover and seconder? Councillor Holmes and Councillor Ferguson, thank you. And all in favor? Perfect. Thank you very much. No consultant reports, so we are down to staff reports. Corporate Services Director Kathy Davis. Take it away. We have 4 recommended motions in here, so take your time. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions. Over to you.
There we go. Thank you. Righty. So we are here tonight to talk about reserves and reserve funds. I'm just re-showing this slide, which shows the work plan that council approved that came out of the long-term financial plan. So we've addressed the capital levy recommendation. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the life cycle asset management, and council approved the strategic asset management policy. So now we're moving on to reserves and reserve funds. And we'll be back with some more reports after this, slowly working our way through these items. Just as a quick little bit of history on reserves and reserves funds, you'll remember in 2024, we did review a much bigger review of the reserves and reserve funds. Council approved the consolidation of a bunch of the accounts that we had. We updated the policy quite a bit. We added development charges to the policy. And then in 2025, when that policy was reviewed as part of the long-term financial plan, KPMG did find that it addressed a number of the things that they would have recommended. They had a few more policy recommendations. So that's what this report is bringing to you, is just to consider the implications of those recommendations and whether that is something that council would like to proceed with. So the report is broken into a few different sections. The first part is about the policy review. So when we look at KPMG's recommendations, they had suggested that council consider an operating stabilization reserve and a capital stabilization reserve. The stabilization reserves are intended to support the municipality in years where unforeseen circumstances cause either an operating deficit or a capital project overrun or something like that, that gives a little bit of support to those initiatives. So I am actually proposing that that be combined. I didn't really see the need to have 2 separate stabilization reserves. I think having, you'll see later on, it is quite a substantial number, and I think having one reserve makes more sense. The other recommendation was that a 10% target be put on that reserve. So that's 10% of annual operating expenditures and 10% of annual budgeted capital expenditures. So that comes in over $4 million. Right now, there is a $1.1 million balance in the stabilization reserve. So in the policy, that is the first recommended change to the policy, that we change the reserve right now is called stabilization. It doesn't have any kind of parameters around it. So change the name of that reserve to a capital and operating stabilization reserve. The next suggested amendment was to just identify the new capital asset reserve. This is where the capital asset levy is being deposited. So there was around 130,000 in the 2026 budget. So the policy is just reflecting the decision that was already made. The third recommendation in the policy is that a mechanism be created for council direction around surplus funds at the end of the year. So we've had the discussion a few times after we close out our year. Where does that surplus go? What are we doing with that? And I wanted to kind of delineate the operating surplus from the capital surplus, because the capital projects are still going to happen. So it's not something that is a true surplus per se. It's just kind of deferred. But then in any budget year, there could be an operating surplus. There could also be an operating deficit where the stabilization reserve would come in. So I'm suggesting in the policy that we have a year-end review, and then at that time that council would be given recommendations around treatment of the operating surplus. So those are the only proposed amendments to the policy. A lot of work was done on the policy a couple ago. So this is just to kind of catch us up. Schedule A to the policy is, you've seen it, I'm sure, a long list of every single reserve that we do have, a reserve account, and what it's for. So how it was established, where the funds come, if there is a target for it, and what the purpose is. So a few proposed changes to Schedule A. The first one was that 10% target on the operating and capital stabilization, the creation of the capital asset reserve, and then a few kind of housekeeping notes. I find that this is a good transparent way for us to keep track of, over time, those reserves get complicated and a lot of information flows through there. So I thought this was a way to note what might be upcoming for that. So just noting the building condition assessments will probably help us in the future establish, if we wanted to set up life cycle costing reserves for facilities, for example. I think I'll jump on from that one. So after the policy and Schedule A recommendations, there are a few proposed redistributions, I guess is the best way to put it. So in the recommendation from KPMG, it's a 10% of your annual operating and capital budget balance that they would propose be in that stabilization reserve. So on the left, you can see this is the current distribution of the balances in those reserves. The stabilization reserve currently has 1.1 million. The proposed new distribution, and this is really just kind of moving funds from one reserve account into another, that operating and capital stabilization reserve would have a $4.8 million balance. I was asked today about benchmarks throughout the rest of the province. How much do people generally have in their stabilization reserves? So while KPMG was proposing 10%, the MFOA report from 2019 showed that on average across the province, it was around a 4% stabilization balance, some absolutely higher. I was able to find a few policies today, and where policies have been written, municipalities are between 5 and 10% targets. So I think, there's probably a lot at play in that average, and the 10% would be best practice, but there are varying treatments of that across the province. So the next reserve is the capital reserve, and this is what we use as our general capital when projects are approved in the budget to come from reserves. Right now, 4.9 projected balance as of the end of 2026. And if we do this shift of the 3.7, I believe, we would be left with 1.2 million in that general capital reserve. It really is just kind of setting aside the funds that would be earmarked for stabilization, and then probably give council a better sense of what those discretionary funds are after that. So regardless of where they sit, that would really be, if we wanted to say 10% is the target, 4.8 million is what's in the stabilization reserve, then there would be 1.2 million left in the general capital. The capital asset levy there's $130,000 balance in there right now. I'm not proposing any changes to that. That was just approved. And then there are, as you know, a number of other discretionary reserves held by the municipality for things such as water and wastewater, landfill closures. We have the industrial development, those kinds of things. So there still is a fair bit of reserve balance in those accounts, and I'm not suggesting any of that be changed either. Okay. And then a few just quick strategies that are coming out, some of them coming out of the report from a couple of weeks ago, and some of them housekeeping. So the very first one is there are 2 reserves when you dig into the details that are fire department reserves. I think one is called equipment. When we found the old establishment of that, it was the sale of fire-related equipment went into a reserve for the fire department, and then there's a separate reserve for the fire department. We think those can be combined into one. The next one is $15,000 to the roads department reserve each year for bridges and culverts, and that comes out of the asset management plan just for regular and routine maintenance, so that if there is not an expense in a given year's budget, we can build up that reserve until such time as it's needed. The $380,000 for parks and recreation. I wanted to explain this one because I'm was rereading my report. I want to make sure this makes sense. So the asset management plan suggests that $380,000 is the annual life cycle cost for parks and amenities. We don't always spend that much, and sometimes it's more. So the suggestion is that that amount be kind of held as an earmark in the budget. And in a year where we don't need that much, so if we only needed 200,000 in a year, then the other 180 be put to reserves, so that in the following year, if an expense comes up, then we can take the reserve.
I'm going to ask a question, and if I need to pass the chair, let me know. But I sent you an email today, and it's kind of it's keeps playing in my mind, so I just want to clear it up. What KPMG suggested, the 10%, that is based on the capital, not based on, but that would take in everything on the capital asset management plan? No. Okay. So that's where can you just clarify that for me? Like what, that 10%, what's that supposed to cover in terms of capital? What out of that asset management plan can we take out of all the rest of the reserves? Am I making sense?
Yes, yes. So the intent of the stabilization reserve is really to, it's not for those expenses, it's for cost overruns and things like that. So that's why, probably why we see some municipalities that don't have the full 10% there. But it is to cover, if there is a capital project that's ongoing and it runs into, unforeseen costs that we did not budget and that we don't have the funds for, that's where that stabilization reserve comes in. The snow is a good example. If we have a really heavy snow year and there's an operating deficit there, stabilization covers that. Some of the literature also refers to it as kind of a tax rate stabilization. So it helps when, you want to kind of smooth the tax rate increase as opposed to have that jump around, but it's not necessarily intended for the capital.
Councillor Suter?
My question comes from the 380,000 for parks and recreation assets. My question is, we approved last year a budget of roughly 400,000 for tennis court rehabilitation. Is that 380,000 the place where the money would come from? Or would that be considered a facility? Because it's a built thing.
Correct. That is part of the parks and recreation assets. So there are a few assets that aren't facilities. So we consider the arenas to be facilities. The Cedar Hill Schoolhouse is a facility. So just buildings, but all of the courts and the fields and those kinds of things, the splash pad, that kind of stuff is a park and recreation asset. So typically in our budgets, we've seen there are lots of smaller projects in Parks and Recreation and then occasionally a bigger one. And those are funded annually, which is helpful. But then when we run into those bigger projects, we don't necessarily have reserves set aside for them. So they don't happen every year, those big projects. And if we were putting away that difference, then by the time we get to needing to renew that asset, then that's the idea. But it is a shift from how we've been funding those projects lately. We've borrowed and.
Councillor Holmes?
Thank you. Kathy, just so I'm clear, the 15,000 to the road department reserve. So does that mean that each department will also carry a reserve?
They do right now. And I've actually had the question, do we need to do it that way? And it's a
Yeah.
very good question. Right now, each department has its own reserve. Some of them legitimately, like water and sewer, should have its own reserve because that's how it's funded. The building department needs to have its own reserve, that kind of thing. But then when you look at the taxpayer-funded recreation, roads, those kinds of things, it probably could be amalgamated and prioritized differently.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
would probably be my preference.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, in terms of Parks and Recreation, having that amount, I think is a good target. As you say, there are many smaller ones. However, it will never build up into a reserve for a major project if it's considered to be part of the budget for repairs, et cetera, right across Parks and Rec. So I think that still is something would have to be looked at closely in budget processes.
I think that's a very good point. All of these strategies, I'm just recommending that they be included in the first draft, and then council can see what the implications would be. Because I don't think we've had a $380,000 capital line in recreation before. It might be something that we have to build up to over time, just like everything else. But that's a starting point, and then we can see what it looks like.
Just to follow up on Councillor Holmes, and going back to the asset management plan, because I'm so happy that we have one, and I want us to use it effectively. I would love to see the annual requirements by department like we have, but then not broken out by, bridges and culverts, this much for this department, this much for this department generally, but it's one reserve that can be fluid as needed. But for tracking, council would understand this much, okay, let's for an example, $5 million is now in the roads reserve fund, and that, we're going to spend it in the next few years this way. Am I making sense? Then there would be one main reserve that we understand is the total amount that we should be aiming for. I'm just not sure I like seeing it broken up so much, so individually. And the other thing is, and I asked you about this again earlier, the reserve for, so an example, contingency general admin, it's basically a stabilization reserve for admin, legal fees and stuff. So we've moved to a reserve of 10% for the whole town. Would those ones go away?
I would see that one definitely, because that is the purpose of it, that we could roll that into the stabilization. That reduces the amount that we would have to move over into that. There was another one that was similar, and it's slipping my mind right now, but yeah, I think I kind of categorized them into the ones that need to stay and be their own reserves because that's how they're funded, ones that really serve the purpose of stabilization right now, and then the rest, which, yeah.
Councillor Ferguson?
Thank you, Kathy. And under your policy review, the fourth bullet there, you had year-end review or year-end reserves review. would you consider something at 6 months as well?
I think that's where I'm hoping to get,
Okay.
so that at the end of the calendar year, it takes us a while to get through the audit. So it would probably be closer to summer is that what you're asking, that we would bring it back and give council a chance to look at where do we stand now? What's left in these reserves? What are they set aside for? What are the approved projects?
Exactly.
And
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think to add on to Councillor Ferguson, like my understanding was instead of once a year, we'd have an update in 6 months. Is that feasible?
I think it is feasible. We could give that. I don't know that it's going to give you the data that you want. I think an annual report is probably going to give you more accurate, reliable information just because of the timing of projects. So if all of the big public works projects are happening during the summer, you're not going to see that until it hits at the end of the year anyway. We can definitely provide, the chart that I included as an attachment to this report. We could give that to you, but I think it's going to be missing some context.
I was thinking more of that stabilization,
Okay.
so because my understanding is if Public Works needs $5 million out of that, it doesn't come to council to be approved, right? Like what comes to council, I guess what I'm thinking of, if there's a huge drop in that, I'd like to know it. And I don't know how you do that, but anyway, thank you.
Very good question. I think, and it's coming down to, are we facing an operational deficit? And I think maybe a 6-month operational report would be what council would, yeah. Okay.
Can we let Kathy proceed a little bit further and then it might answer some questions we're thinking ahead of?
I'm getting close anyway. And these are just a couple more recommended strategies that came out of some of the thinking in the report, and some conversations that we have had since then, directing a portion of user group contributions towards applicable reserves. So I think this depends on how agreements look and how users are paying for different programs or services, those kinds of things. And then plan for the use of the capital asset levy for fleet and equipment. So that's something we've talked about before, but I think there's still always council decision-making on what gets spent from a reserve. So this would, again, just kind of be a starting point in the budget. I was almost at the end. So, I tried to make these as straightforward as I could. On the left are adopt any or all recommendations, and then on the right is just related to the policy one. So recommending that we transfer the 3.7 million to general capital reserve, from the general capital reserve to the operating and capital stabilization reserve, merging the 2 fire department reserves, and then at the bottom there, incorporating the recommendations into the 2027 draft. And then on the policy side, approving the proposed changes.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Suter, did you have a question? Councillor Torrance, you'll be next.
Yes, previous slide. I heard what you had to say about the 15,000 for bridges and culverts being a tiny amount that seems to be detail beyond what's necessary. But I think if you remember some of the budget discussions, because we are nearly finished a major cycle of rehabilitation and reconstruction on bridges and culverts, I think it was seen as about the only opportunity we have to establish a reserve and see whether we can let it build. Because the hope is that within the next 10 years or so, there won't be a major project on any of the reconstructed bridges. They're a very long-term asset. And I understand the detail being too much, because it can get very unwieldy. But I think that one would be good just to keep as, I don't know, as a pilot project.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. We need to keep track of that and make sure we're funding that. And maybe where I'm going is what's public versus what's private. Like what you report to council maybe doesn't need the minutia, but what you keep track of internally absolutely does. And maybe that's where I'm coming from.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. Councillor Torrance?
I want to talk about the amount that we're proposing to transfer from general capital to capital stabilization. I think you and I spoke about this, Kathy, today, but I would like to see what other funds, what other of the reserve funds are coming into the capital stabilization reserves. And so it's not just this amount. If we're going, like everything else that is already in a reserve for stabilization, that there, we have a reserve for admin. I think we have a reserve for snow removal, you know, winter operations, something like that. Everything we've already thought about stabilization in different ways. So what else have we put aside for stabilization, and how can we bring it into this new capital stabilization reserves, or are we set, or capital or operational stabilization reserves? I think some of it is operational, you know, and so how do we differentiate between the capital and the operational, for one thing? And the second thing is that I don't think that we need to have it at 10%. I think that we could start at 5%, and then if we wanted to, you know, like this is worst case scenario stuff, guys. You know, like to put 10% away for worst case scenario is quite a bit, especially when we know that we don't have enough in our capital reserves. And this Madam Chair, goes to your question about the asset management plan. You know, like that should be where we're putting the money, I think, because that is, you know, I don't think we should be jumping to make one reserve higher than it currently is at the sake of another that's actually going towards work that we're trying to plan for. So anyway, I think that they're a little bit opposite of what they should be, but I think I'm glad we're talking about it. As far as the recreation, I'm really happy to see money going in there, because we know it's capital, so it's Zambonis, it's dasher boards, it's you know, curling clubs, and like all kinds of things that would be coming out of those capital monies, those reserve monies, and to be able to know that we have an annual amount will actually keep us on top of the work, so that we don't get pulled into a year where we, like this 5 years where we have tennis clubs, curling clubs, and lawn bowling clubs that all need substantial work within the same time frame. Smoothing it a different way. Thank you.
Councillor Holmes?
Following up on Councillor Torrance about the stabilization, like is 10% too much? I'm not sure if I'm saying this properly, but if we're making this, my understanding is operations and capital, you're recommending they be together for stabilization, right? But in fact, if we wanted to, if somebody wanted that information, you would be able to pull it out pretty easy with your accounting system.
It's really based on what the prior year's budget is. So we
Yeah.
would just be able to, here's the operating budget, here's 10% of it.
So I guess what I was getting at with it, is there any way to go back and look at the budgets that are now used kind of for stabilization, to see about how much is actually, like, is it 5% of our budget? Is it 10%? Do you understand what I mean? What I'm meaning? Like, what's our history, I guess, for needing stabilization?
I think I can look at that. Yeah.
It might
Mhm.
just help us to determine the number. Thank you.
Any other questions? Could we get the options back up on the board, or am I? Oh, they're on, okay. Do we want to do them one by one?
Yeah.
That's okay. I've actually got them in front of me here. Oh, thank you. Got it. So recommendation 1 is that committee of the whole recommend council direct staff to transfer 3,709,832 from an account called general capital reserves to operating and capital stabilization reserves. Is there anyone who wants to make that motion? Councillor Torrance?
I would actually make the motion that we refer this back to staff to answer some of the questions that have been raised about the difference, what's the history of what's being used for stabilization, what would 5% look like instead of 10%, which would allow an additional amount to be used in capital in the coming years. I need more information before I could actually recommend this. So I would move that we refer it back to staff.
Thank you. And Councillor Holmes, you want a second? Okay. Is there any discussion on the motion to refer back to staff? Mayor Lowry?
Only that we're clear about some of the items. I think there's been really good discussion and really good comments. My only suggestion is that we're clear about what it is we're looking to have come back so that all of the information we're hoping to have as part of that discussion is here when it comes back. Yeah, if we can capture it with the referral motion or deferral motion.
Refer, yeah, refer back.
Oh, Jane.
Councillor Torrance?
Well, I would say we look at the history of how much do we usually use in stabilization reserves as they're currently named. What other stabilization reserves do we have that could be rolled into this this new stabilization reserve? What would, if we were to, what is the what's the wisdom in making it 10% versus 5%? I think that I would like to consider a lower amount. And how would that change your report, and what would it do to capital, so that we can actually think about that in a larger way. So those are the 3 things that I would like to see.
Are we all comfortable with that? Mayor Lowry?
I could just add one thing. I agree with the list fully. I'm wondering on that first point that Councillor Torrance made about the history of use of stabilization funds. I'm not quite sure how to say this, so bear with me. If we have used funding in a more creative way and moving forward, if we would be using stabilization reserves. I'm not sure how to direct this question, but if in the information that you're pulling together to provide to us doesn't include ways that we have funded from other sources and really should have been this. That's I think what I'm trying to say. I'm not sure how you're going to pull that. So I think my direction, my want of including that in the direction is more if like you're seeing something you feel should be part of this discussion beyond just the straight up history of a stabilization fund. I think that would be really helpful, at least for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, go ahead, Director.
Yeah, I think I'm picturing, yes, kind of an operational budget review as opposed to, yeah, how did we fund everything? Yeah.
Yeah. Councillor Suter?
In connection with what Mayor Lowry just said about specific examples in history, one major capital project in the last 2 years was significantly higher than originally budgeted, and that was Union Street. And perhaps it might make it more useful to council if we include that as an example, when it happened, what happened, where did the money come from? Okay? Because I realized that the general has been like a great big slush fund. And I think we're trying to more clearly delineate what reserves are for. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I believe the motion is to refer item A back to staff with providing information on history, what accounts can be rolled into the stabilization fund, and what is the impact on capital reserves. And we have a mover and seconder. All in favor? And that carries. Okay, on to, thank you, number 2, that the committee of the whole recommend council direct staff to merge the 2 fire department reserves into one account. Does anybody want to make a motion or have a question? Okay, so Deputy Mayor and Councillor Ferguson, thank you very much. Any discussion on that one? All in favor? And that carries. Motion 3, that committee of the whole recommend council direct staff to incorporate the staff recommendations in discussion section D into the 27 staff draft budget. A mover and seconder for that? Or any questions? Councillor Suter? Move. Seconder? Councillor Holmes? Any questions? Okay, all in favor? And that one carries. And so down to number 4, that committee of the whole recommend council approve the reserves and reserve fund policy and schedule A as amended. Any questions? Councillor Suter?
Since we have already chosen to defer or refer back,
Refer.
I think that's now either
Removed, yeah.
redundant or contradictory to what our
Yeah.
intent was.
I think maybe we can just take this one off the table for now. Yeah? Okay. Is everybody comfortable with where we landed? Okay. Thanks, Kathy. Appreciate it. Thanks. Okay. I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm assuming we're at development now. Development Services and Engineering, E2 Recommendation Report, D14, 115, 25, 195 and 197 Adelaide Street. Over to you, Director.
Thank you, Chair. As noted, this is a presentation for the zoning bylaw amendment for 195, 197 Adelaide Street. As committee will remember, there was a public meeting held 2 weeks ago for this application. So just to provide a recap, the property is located outlined in blue up on the screen. It's at the corner of, well, sort of partially at the corner of Napier Court and Adelaide Street. So it has frontage on both Napier Court and Adelaide Street. The applicants have received conditional approval of a severance application from the county. One of the conditions of severance was that the property be rezoned to facilitate the development of the proposed semi-detached dwellings, as well as address the remaining use of the lands. So the current zoning of the property, again outlined in yellow, is the proposed semi-detached dwellings. If the consent were to go through, that property would be split zoned residential type 2 and development. And the same applies for the retained lands, which are outlined in red. So the purpose of the rezoning is to rezone the severed lands outlined in yellow to an R2 zone that would permit the semi-detached dwellings, as well as rezone the remainder of the land to an R2 zoning which would allow future development at some point on those retained lands. Specifically with respect to the proposed semi-detached dwellings, their proposed lot area is proposed to be reduced to 250 square meters, whereas the general R2 zone requires 320, as well as permit a reduced lot frontage of 9.1 meters, as opposed to 10 meters for each unit. There's no other request for performance standards to be relaxed, including minimum setbacks or maximum height or lot coverage of the property. I would say that the two requested reductions are reflected in other subzones that we do have in the residential type 2 zone. So these reductions are common in other areas of Almont. And again, the retained lot is also proposed to be rezoned. Again, we're trying to reduce the planning processes in terms of an underutilized lot. That's what the development zone generally recommends. And since this application was subject to the zoning bylaw amendment for the semi-detached dwelling, they've also included the retained lands as part of that zoning bylaw amendment to rezone it to a special R2 zone. In terms of staff's evaluation of the application, the proposal does conform to the official plan and the zoning bylaw amendment. Specifically, the official plan does have a series of policies that support infill and providing a variety and mix of housing options within the residential areas of the municipality. And certainly the official plan has policies that support the development of what we call underutilized lots, which are essentially lots that are large and could be used for other uses or additional uses such as additional residential dwellings. Staff have also looked at the zoning bylaw. I do want to touch on what we commonly refer to as the planned function of an area. So on the screen, the subject property is outlined in blue, and all the different colors that we see on the screen mean different, essentially residential zones, save and except the green and the blue there that are institutional and parkland. But this neighborhood is definitely a blend of almost all the different zones that we have in the zoning bylaw, R1, R2, and R3. We don't have any R4s, which is saved for low-rise apartment buildings. But just wanted to note that when we planners talk about the planned function of a neighborhood, we talk about not only what's existing, but what is sort of the overall plan for the neighborhood as it evolves over time. And the zoning clearly, reflects a mixed neighborhood with different types of uses and different types of, residential uses and different types of built forms. There is a series of comments provided from the public, both verbally at the public meeting as well in writing to the planning office. The report details a number of key points that were raised by a lot of the comments. In terms of the built form, it is a proposed semi-detached dwelling. I would say that from the planning department's analysis, this is definitely a common type of dwelling in the area. And of course, I've already highlighted that the plan function is to have a range of different types of dwelling units in the area, but there's also existing quite a range of dwelling units in this neighborhood. In terms of shadowing and privacy, I'd say generally speaking at this lower scale of development, shadowing is generally not considered to be a negative impact. A typical two-story house is not something that our planning framework really would identify as being something that needs to be considered as to, not approved because of any sort of shadowing impacts. Even if we were to consider it, an 11-meter height limit is not something that is going to produce, notable shadowing impacts on adjacent properties. In terms of grading and drainage, this was an issue that was brought up as well. As council committee will know that we've passed a lot grading and drainage bylaw a few years ago that regulates lot grading and drainage on properties, residential properties in Almont. And so we do staff review the grading and drainage at the building permit stage to ensure that the construction of anything on a property does not adversely impact the grading and drainage on another property. And then again, in terms of parking and traffic, I would say a semi-detached dwelling is generally, again, not considered to have a negative impact in terms of parking and traffic generation for a residential neighborhood. And so, the consideration of vehicle generation from two homes, again, is not considered to have a negative impact. I'll end the presentation here. We are here at the committee of the whole, and then following that, there would be a council decision in terms of the passing of the bylaw, and then proceeding through to the end of the appeal period.
Thank you, Director. Are there any questions? Councillor Suter?
Yeah, could you please move to the next slide? The one that has, no, the one that, or maybe it's the one before that one. First question, I assume that a single owner owns the entire T of that land right now.
Through you, Chair, yes, that's correct. The single owner owns the entire T.
Okay, and they have asked for a reduction from the minimum 320 square meters to 250. Correct? That's one of the variances they've asked for, the lot size.
That's correct. So 320 square meters down to 250.
One thing that struck me when I first saw this is the fact that you've got almost a perfect T with a core stem on it. And what is proposed to be severed leaves a truncated side. I know that it's approximately 18 meters wide. So 18 times 3 would get very close to the 320 square meters. Did the owners provide any information about why they chose to leave that truncated part in red? I can see the building, but I do not know the scale, so I don't know the answer to. If they've got it that deep, why didn't they make it another couple of meters deep? And they'd be almost at the 320.
Through you, Chair. Great point. It's my understanding that that building that we see at the sort of end of the T, along the what I would call the rear lot line, is a large detached garage, which is and so it's my understanding that they wanted to keep a little bit of room so that they still had an area to turn around for vehicular movements. I would say that generally speaking, as I mentioned before, there's a number of R2 subzones that do permit lot sizes of close to what they're requesting, and so we didn't have an issue with it at the time. It is a very strange shaped lot because it's a T, and because you've got two ends of the T that have frontage on a street, but unfortunately the third end of the T over here does not. And so it's a very strange configuration. And so there's not a clear logical way to sever up this property, in terms of the future that would sort of regularize anything else. And so staff did not have a huge concern with that extra piece.
That was the reason I thought, okay, the other side has very little chance of being developed because it doesn't front on a street. That shows some sort of driveway in front of the building that veers to the left. But I think given the lack of alternate uses for the other side, that driveway could easily be turned. It looks like a gravel one to go the other way to allow lots of room to turn around and yet still give the two severed parts enough square meterage to meet the bylaw rather than get a minor variance. That's why I asked the question. It's just sort of bothered me. They could get closer, that's all.
Any other questions? Sorry, I was waiting to see if Melanie had something. Councillor Torrance?
Well, I think that Councillor Suter has hit it on the head for me, and we didn't even talk about this beforehand. But I'm actually okay with the reduced frontage, but the reduced lot size, when there obviously is room to maintain the lot size, I have been struggling with that. You know, it doesn't make sense why we are making this special exception when we don't need to. And I wanted to know whether or not the proponent had if you've had a discussion what they intend to do with the retained lot or not. But I don't know why we would give a special exception for lot size when we don't need to.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Torrance, in terms of what's being requested, the applicant did provide a sketch that showed the proposed building envelope that would be amenable to the requested lot area. And so staff did not raise the issue of a reduced lot area in our analysis. As I mentioned before, we also have other subzones that contemplate a lot area similar to this, so we did not think it was out of character. I would say that the rezoning is required, obviously, because the property is split zoned. The applicant has not indicated to us any firm plans on redeveloping the retained lands. As I noted, it's a bit of an awkward site, and so I'm sure there's some options that they can consider, but we don't have anything in front of us tonight in terms of what they plan on doing with the retained lot.
Thank you. On page 55 of our package, there's a different picture that looks like a covered boat. And that gives us a better idea of the scale of what they're leaving. So I think what they're trying to do is to be able to put something beside the garage and then have a few extra feet. That's what it looks like to me. But however, I completely understand there's lots of land on the other side. So why shortchange the people who are going to be living in these severed lots when there's room to give them a bit more? What would be would we just refer this if there's a desire to see how if this could be changed by the requester? What process do we use? Anybody?
If I may,
Yeah.
Chair, this is a severance application that's been conditionally approved by the Land Division Committee at the county.
Okay.
And so, changing the proposed lot fabric would require the applicants to return back to the Land Division Committee
Okay.
and formally change their application. I'd say that, again, I just want to stress that the planning department doesn't have any issues with the lot area that's proposed. There's a building envelope that's quite functional. We're, achieving the 7.5 meter rear yard setback that is standard in many zones and many properties. And we didn't raise any concerns at the land division stage in terms of why they were proposing it. And thank you for pointing out the aerial map that was on the because it does show the sort of the storage, outdoor storage that they have. That garage is quite substantial. And so, again, I can't speak for the applicants in terms of their specific motivation, but it was, vehicular movement and storage and providing a bit of a buffer area from that structure.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Mayor Lowry? And then Councillor Torrance. Oh, Councillor Torrance, go ahead.
Well, I'm just very confused about if our zoning bylaw says that in R2, we require 320 meters per principal dwelling for a semi-detached, and that's what we require. And just like, I don't understand why we would suddenly veer from that. If that's a requirement of our zoning bylaw, why do we want to make a special exemption? Just because there might be a special exemption someplace else doesn't mean that we should make that our norm. Otherwise, we should change our zoning bylaw to say what the minimum lot size is. If we reduce this size, it means that there will not be any chance for an ARU on this property. It will not be big enough. Like, it goes against, as far as I'm concerned, what we've been trying for in neighborhoods is to be able to have a lot size that's actually workable. So I'm okay with reducing the front yard, sorry, the width of the lot. I think from 10 to 9.1. I can understand why that needs to have a special exception in this case, because there's just not enough land owned. But there is enough land owned. We do not need to grant a special exception. I'm sorry that it's gone through a severance already. I don't think it should have, but that's, if we're voting on this now, this is our chance to vote, then, should we vote with the zoning bylaw that we have, or should we be making a special exception? Exception is how it's called. I think not, actually.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Lowry?
I'd like if we could go back, page 39 for me. It's the third last paragraph. There are several examples of similar lot frontages at areas including townhouses on Adelaide Street and Finner Court, which have lot areas ranging from 180 meters squared to 230 meters squared. And I'm wondering if, through the chair, if we can ask the director to explain that again for us. And I do appreciate where Councillor Torrance is coming from. Like, if we have a zoning bylaw, why are we not being consistent there? However, I'm seeing it in a somewhat of a different way. If we went through the municipality and took all of the R2 zones and did lot area surveys, they'd be all over the map. I mean, our policies are in place with strategy and purpose in mind, I guess you could say. I don't think that the purpose of this lot would be to make it large enough that we know ARUs are going to be on there, because my understanding is there's a principal dwelling and a semi-detached dwelling. There'll be 2 units on here. So I don't think the intention is to be able to make all lots able to also offer an ARU. But just for starting point, I would ask if you can clarify what I've read there, and am I understanding it correctly in that there are examples with far smaller lot areas than what's being asked for here in that community?
That's correct. Through you, Chair, to the mayor. Yes, there's a range of lot sizes in this community for sure. We do have, as I was referring to, the subzones, just looking them up. The subzones are essentially, the R2 zone is sort of your principal zone that, gives you some of your standards, but then over time, as the zoning bylaw evolves, as I mentioned before, it was written in 2011. We create what we call subzones, which address different conditions. And the subzones for the R2 zone, there's 5 of them, and they permit a range of 225 meters squared to 315 meters squared in terms of the lot areas. And so again, that's why staff did not have an issue with what they were proposing, because it does not only reflect the context of the neighborhood, but also falls within the range of what's considered in the zoning bylaw now for semi-detached dwellings.
Thank you.
Thank you for the reply. Mayor Lowry?
I have a written statement I'd like to share at some point, but I will wait until you've decided that's the time if there's further conversation or questions to our director.
Okay, do we have any further questions looking around? Okay, I think it might be time to hear a statement.
Well, I had prepared this given how passionate and how heartfelt the neighbors who came to speak to us and the written comments we've received. We're in a housing crisis, and I absolutely don't support sending this back to Land Division Committee. I don't even think we have the authority to do that. I'm not sure what that would look like. But to share with my colleagues where I'm at on this one, I wrote down how I'm feeling about this, because this is difficult. This is difficult. But I think it's important to share how I'm thinking about this. So if you indulge me in reading this, I want to begin by acknowledging that change is rarely easy. When you live in a neighborhood you love, it's natural to feel anxious when something new is proposed nearby. Many of the concerns that we've heard come from a place of wanting stability and reassurance, and I appreciate those feelings. At the same time, our community is changing, and the pressures we face today are very different from those of the past. In Mississippi Mills, like much of rural Ontario, we're in a full housing crisis and a full cost of living crisis. We have an incomplete spectrum of housing, which means we don't have enough choice for people at different stages of life or with different incomes. We've heard that the proposed homes are not homogeneous with surrounding properties because they're smaller. We've heard concerns about parking, yard sizes, sunlight, and cars on the street. These concerns often emerge with any infill proposal, and accordingly, our planning tools already evaluate these issues through zoning standards, lot coverage, height, parking requirements, and separation distances. A home that's smaller is not a lesser home. It's simply a different option that meets a different need. We also heard from retirees who moved to our community because they could enjoy bigger yards. Certainly some retirees do, but many cannot afford bigger properties. Increasingly, numbers of retirees want something smaller, more manageable, and closer to services. Others want the ability to downsize while staying in our community. Smaller footprint homes make this a possibility. Right now, the price of what many would consider a typical home in Almonte is simply out of reach. As an example, on the opposite side of Adelaide, an 1,100 square foot bungalow recently sold for over $580,000, according to Redfin. This was 2 weeks ago. This is the reality of today's market. It is not a luxury home. It's a lovely, modest-sized bungalow. But if a basic 1,100 square foot bungalow is already priced out of reach for so many, we cannot rely on this single form of homogeneous housing to support young families, the workforce, or older residents who want to stay in our community. A home at this price point might work for some, but it's simply not attainable for many, which is why we need homes at reachable price points in all of our neighborhoods. We need housing choices for children and grandchildren of those who are fortunate enough to afford to retire here. We need options for the personal support workers who care for residents in our hospital and long-term care homes. We need options for people who work at the grocery store and the coffee shops. We need homes for families who are starting out with far less financial stability than previous generations. We need homes for the people who keep our community running every day. Smaller footprint homes use our land and our municipal infrastructure more efficiently. This helps us grow responsibly instead of expanding outwards in ways that strain services, increase costs for taxpayers, and risk sprawling and putting additional pressures on agricultural lands. Our policies are clear in their support of intensification and of infill to help fill the gaps in the housing spectrum here in Mississippi Mills. This approach is not new. It's consistent with our official plan and with the provincial planning statement. We also have real examples of infill being done well and being well received. On the opposite side of Adelaide, a 3-unit townhome was approved with minor variances and a severance, and we didn't receive a single negative comment. On Gore Street, we have a similar project that includes a semi with an additional residential unit on each side for 4 units in total. Again, there were no public objections. Gentle density can fit comfortably within established neighborhoods. It's also true that these kinds of changes can feel difficult because they ask us to adjust our expectations of what our streets look like. Neighborhoods naturally evolve over time, often small and gradual ways, and it's normal to feel uncertain when that evolution reaches our own doorstep. I want to acknowledge that it is not easy and that it makes sense when people feel cautious when changes come close to home. Our role as a council is to plan for our entire community. That means not only those who already own a home, but those who are trying to find theirs. It means building a community where people of all ages and incomes can live. It means looking ahead and making decisions that support our long-term health and the resilience and fairness of our community. I sincerely thank every resident who shares the concerns on planning matters. Their care for our community and their neighborhoods comes shining through. We also need to make sure that Mississippi Mills remains a place where everyone belongs, not only those who can afford a $600,000 home. Responsible infill and smaller homes help us meet that goal. When we plan with care, we create a future where families of all kinds and generations can afford to build their lives here, and where children can grow up, come back, and raise their own kids in the same welcoming community that raised them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Wise words, and I think we deal with this probably more than anything else as counselors. And that was very well said. Competing priorities, and at the end of the day, we have a responsibility to the whole community. And nobody can guarantee that your home, the area around your home, will ever stay the same. As sad as and as difficult as I know that is. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Do we have any other comments? Are we ready to go to a motion? Okay, I'll read the motion. That Committee of the Whole recommend that Council approve the zoning bylaw amendment to amend the zoning of the subject lands from residential second density R2 and development D to residential second density special exception R2XX and residential second density special exception R2YY to permit a reduced minimum lot area and a lot frontage for semi-detached dwellings, similar in effect to attachment B. Is there a mover for that motion? Deputy Mayor, and seconded by Mayor Lowry. Any further discussion? All in favor? All opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you. Thanks very much, Director. We are on to F, no notices of motion. The quarterly reports are there for information purposes only. Please reach out to staff with any questions. And H, information items. The following correspondence was received. No action is required as these are for information purposes only. Are there any items that someone would like to make a motion to pull? Councillor Ferguson?
Yes, thank you. The Ministry of Municipal Affairs, and it's more of a clarification where it says respecting premises with illegal drug activities. I don't know what that might mean.
Do we want to pull it to have a look at it at the next Committee of the Whole?
Yes, I would, unless it can be explained right now. Without it, I don't know.
Okay, I think we're going to pull it up on the screen to have a look. Looks to me like they're aiming to increase control over illegal drug production. Yeah. So I think the title may be misleading. It looks like they're trying to do the opposite.
Okay, if that's,
It does say that comments can be submitted until March 8th, 2026. So if anybody wants to go back and have another look at that and send comments. Councillor Torrance, did you have?
Well, you want to know what I was concerned about this very same thing, and it's the penalties for landlords who knowingly allow their premises to be used for illegal drug production, because I want to know what the Landlord Tenants Act says about this. It's pretty hard to, even if you know this is what's happening, it's pretty hard to get somebody out of an apartment. So I'd be curious about where this has come from and how, where, if it's cross ministerial or if it's just something that is coming from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing.
Would you like to pull it and ask for more information?
Yes, please.
Okay. Clerks, is that okay? All right. So we'll do that. And that was H1, the first item. On to H2, the mayor's report.
Thank you. I have a few things. I'll start with the Roma update. So we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and there was 3 things that I wanted to report back on. One, we can watch for information. The clerks will, I'm sure, receive it about a septic tank safety awareness campaign. And this is related very tragically to a young child that died because of access that should not have been available into a septic tank, a holding tank. So Roma has joined with AMO in wanting to help with the safety campaign around that. And certainly we have a lot of rural residents with septic tanks. So we will Roma will be putting that information out, and I'm sure that we will want to pass that along to our residents and neighboring communities. The second thing is, I know some members of council have gone to the teeny tiny summits that are put on by Roma and the the Rural Affairs Ministry. So we're working on scheduling those for 2026. There will be one that is online. So regardless to where the rest of them are, there's one that's accessible to everybody. So when I have those dates, I'll share them. But the most significant piece I wanted to share is that we met with the CRTC's Ontario Commissioner. His name is Bram Abramson. He's in the 3rd year of his 5-year term as the CRTC Commissioner for Ontario. And we spent quite a long time discussing some of the connectivity challenges that we're aware of and how it impacts well-being, economic development, service delivery, all kinds of things. And it was quite an eye-opening conversation. We spoke about broadband issues. We spoke about connectivity for cellular issues. And we're also newly aware that there is a risk that landlines may be removed from some areas. And we're concerned, Roma's concerned, that this may happen where there's not reliable internet or reliable cellular coverage. So we have learned that the CRTC has different processes that you can provide your information and your feedback to. And the thing that was troubling is when they make decisions on a hearing or on a consultation, they make their decisions based only on the information that's been provided to them. So they don't go out and seek information. They base it on what is provided to them. So Roma is planning to, we've already applied for intervener status with one consultation regarding landlines. But there's a number of others that we're going to be seeking intervener status on. And we have learned that we can seek that status whether a decision is coming or has been made. There was certainly an acknowledgement, and the commissioner was quite frank that communication may not be their strong suit in letting other organizations know that certain hearings are out or they're looking for consultation on certain items. So in terms of broadband, in terms of cellular, and in terms of landline, Roma is going to be a new line of advocacy. We're very, very pleased that the CRTC reached out to us in this way and helped us understand their processes so that we can hopefully provide better information to them than perhaps they're receiving from their public consultation. That'd be my Roma report. And if there's no questions, I'll move on to two other items that I think everybody has a little bit of information on in front of them.
Are there any questions about the first item? No, go ahead.
Okay, so there was two other things I wanted to bring up tonight. I have the Warden's Caucus resolution that they had sent to the Premier and to the Minister of Transportation back October of last year, 2024, I should say. And it's a request for a framework that could be adopted across the province to assist with the licensing of rideshare companies. So I provided it there so you had a little bit of background as to what the Warden's Caucus was looking for. They acknowledged in here that in both Quebec and BC, there are provincial licensing frameworks already in place, which really opens up the ride sharing opportunity. So the Ubers and other companies like Uber of the province. They've acknowledged that there's a very much a patchwork manner of having bylaws in place. Some communities have them, we do not. And some communities who are adjacent to each other will have conflicting bylaws, which makes it really difficult for some of these ride sharing companies to come into town. And they've outlined as well some of the reasons that a ride sharing company would be a benefit to rural Ontario. Certainly connecting communities, helping reduce impaired driving is another big one. And an innovative approach to transit in rural communities is a third one. And the reason I was drawing this to your attention, I think it was probably shared with us, a year and a bit ago. It's because John Jordan, our MPP, has reached out and has asked if I can provide a letter of support for him. He has a member's bill coming forward, essentially asking to streamline the standardization of provincial regulatory frameworks around rideshare programming. So there's a number of steps that he would go through and able to do this, but he has asked if we would support his ask. It's quite simple, what he has written, that in the opinion of this House, the Government of Ontario should create a streamlined standard provincial regulatory framework for rideshare programs. This framework will create a path for municipalities to work with rideshare organizations to provide Ontarians living in rural and northern areas more transportation choices, freedom, and accessibility. So I wanted to give that as context to seek direction from council to write a letter of support so that John has the support of Mississippi Mills as he goes forward with this project. So that is that.
That's it for you?
Well, I would need that
Yep.
direction if we're
Oh,
happy
okay.
with that as a
So
concept.
That's it. Okay, so do we want to, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Do we want to provide that direction? Okay,
Yeah.
so do we want to make that in a formal motion?
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
Just direct me to, actually, maybe the clerk can suggest just a direct.
Direct the mayor to draft or to submit a letter of support for John Jordan's private member's bill
There.
regarding rural rideshare streamline or something. Oh,
Perfect.
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So Mayor Lowry. Councillor Ferguson, you want to move that? And Councillor Holmes second? Are there any questions? Councillor Ferguson?
Yes, thank you. I also have a question. Is there any grants discussed or reviewed with that? Obviously, the government supports LRTs and that type of thing. So is there anything for urban transportation, I wonder, attached to this in any way?
I don't know, but I don't mind asking him. Like, I know there was some examples, and actually they were in the Warden's Caucus. Like, I think Innisfil had a pretty successful Uber program, and it was almost like a ride on demand kind of program. I don't know if they got some funding for it, even if it was piloted, but I can certainly ask John if that's crossing their minds at all to help get things up and going and encourage usage.
Thank you for that.
I can do that.
Okay, so we have a mover and seconder. Are we okay with the motion as is? All right, all in favor? And that carries. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I thought you might have, I was going to do the one more before we went to the vote, but that's fine, we do
Oh,
it
I
now.
see.
No, no
Apologies.
worries.
Apologies. I just have one more, and it's just an information so that you're all aware. I'm sure you are all aware of the Alto high-speed train concept. There are, well, we had at the county, we had a presentation back in the fall. Details were really low. There were not a lot of details in that presentation. We certainly can circulate the presentation that we received to you, but there is consultation happening next week. I know Ashley and Shion have been communicating about it. We can make sure that all of you know about it. And the clerks have reached out on our behalf to request a meeting with Alto. Alto is the name of the company, to understand what the impacts, if any, could be on Mississippi Mills. They weren't available to meet with us as a delegation or deputation, but they've offered a meeting. I think it's next Monday, with myself and some staff. So we'll certainly let you know what comes of that, and encourage, if you can go to the consultations next week, it's probably a good idea to. And if you don't have the dates, we can make sure to circulate them to you. I think they're both on Tuesday, remember, right? Tuesday during the day and then in the evening. Yeah. And that would be my report.
In Perth? Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions on that one for Mayor Lowry? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to County Council's report.
I'm going to save that report because there's not much on it this month for next week, okay, or for the week after.
Sounds good. Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority? Nothing in this round? Okay, Lanark County Police Services Board.
Yes, there's a meeting held on the 18th and the minutes will be forwarded.
Perfect, thank you. And for the library board report, I know I have something to share with you, but I can't get into my email to grab it. So I'm going to have to push that off to the next one as well. I know we actually had a really good board meeting at the moment. I can't remember any of it, but it was a rather important meeting talking about policies and such. So we'll move on to the meeting calendar. Any questions or observations? All right, seeing none, we are adjourned at 8:32. Beat that 9 o'clock.
Bye, everyone.
Feel better.
Thanks.